Brian Jones, Grid Innovation Manager at OG&E. Thanks for joining me. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So really excited to talk about a couple of things. OG&E is in the midst of a transformation of its own, but the partnership with OATI and the DERMS effort has also grown. So I think it'll be fun to unpack how you guys are approaching the evolution of that platform and the use cases and just parsing out that story. But first, can you share a bit about your background and your role before we get into it?
Sure. So like the utility industry, my career has evolved over time. So I started as an electrical engineer in the power delivery space. So I was designing power lines for new extensions and rebuilds for various reasons, those kinds of things. But my career has taken a few turns. So I got to do a stint as asset management engineer, as a reliability engineer. I've managed some engineering groups, and I've done some time in the IT department working on technology strategy until I ultimately landed in innovation, which has opened up a lot of different conversations.
So you've done some IT, you've done some OT. Now you get to blanket it with innovation, which is ambiguous enough that you probably get to do a lot of really cool things.
That's right.
They can't pigeonhole you. That's why I like having strategy in my title, because it means, who knows what that means. How do you pin down where you want to innovate? Like building that strategy seems to have gotten a lot more complicated for utilities in that there used to be these block and tackle steps. Even 5-10 years ago, you need AMI, and then you need an ADMS, maybe you need a DERMS, and you just kind of go through the motions and you graduate to a different technology suite. Now it's fluctuating demand, it's uncertain demand. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know if it's going to actually materialize. How do you guys think about charting that course and making sure that the strategy stays on a prudent track?
Right. So very fortunately for us, we had some forward-thinking leadership back in the 2009, 2010 era. This was the very initiation of smart grid type efforts. And so we had a partnership.
Ambiguous one. We love smart grid.
Exactly. That one's lived a long life at this point.
We can't kill it.
Yep.
It's just too big of a bucket.
So we had a Department of Energy grant and partnership where we did our first rollout of AMI back at around the 2009 timeframe. At that time, we installed our first ADMS system. We were implementing volt-var control with that. And probably the most important thing that we did was develop a robust thermostat program that was highly successful. So it was an opt-in variable peak price rate, which still is somewhat unique in the industry. That's not really where everybody consolidated at the end of the day. But we have educated customers, and they have taken that and performed well. At our peak, we had 20% of our residential customers were opted in to a rate that changed day to day over the summer season. And we had the technology to signal their thermostats, help them, we call it technology enabled, their demand response behavior. And so that really got us thinking in this direction that we're all heading now out of necessity into the demand response, DERs, and DERMS type space.
And who would have pegged Oklahoma Gas and Electric to mirror many of the themes that we see in Europe on pricing and user engagement and things like that? Things we've seen work that haven't played out the same way in many pockets of our country. So it's interesting to see that you guys have had success there. So you mentioned going from AMI, so you get the grid edge visibility, situational awareness, ADMS, you start to step up your control, your visibility throughout the system, and then the DERMS progression. And that's where the partnership with OATI comes in. But what was that initial need, and how did you guys craft the business case around, we're ready to make this next step and this makes sense for us?
Right. And like any utility, we can be as forward thinking as we'd like to be. But at the end of the day, what makes the decision is the practical need of the moment. So we've talked about the data center load. In Oklahoma, we have relatively inexpensive power and land. These are key factors for the cryptocurrency industry. So kind of pre-AI boom, there's the crypto boom where they're wanting to build data centers. And so it was our first need to wrestle with this question of how do you serve a large load with a different risk profile than the rest of your customer base? How do you protect customers financially? How do you make your system reliable whenever you have these large loads that could come online or offline kind of without a lot of control and management from our part? And so we were able to leverage a legacy program that we had set up for large C&I customers. So that's commercial and industrial customers. And it was really an economic development tool for us. We would bring new loads into our territory by offering them a nice discount for this option to curtail voluntarily when called upon. It's not an option we had to use a lot over the years. We've used it very little. But hidden inside of that was this option for direct load control, meaning that we could set up some technology to directly signal their curtailment. And it kind of had the bones of a solid demand response program. And that's made all the difference for us in being able to make our grid reliable and affordable as we start to serve some of these new large loads.
And that's what we try to keep in focus as we talk about innovation, is how do we ensure that we are becoming more resilient, and ideally it's a cleaner system, it's more reliable. But if we're also inflating customer rates, then it might be all for naught. So
Right.
I think that's a critical deliberation here. And you talked about that beginning use case and, figuring out how to evolve from there. I think with OATI's DERMS, there's a lot of pride in the modularity, and that we can grow with you or meet you on, whatever stage of the journey. How does that journey look for you guys as you think about the 5-10 year plan and where we can go with the existing suite and bolting on?
Yeah, I mean, you named it. The modularity is one of the main factors that attracted us to OATI in the first place. So we saw this need for direct load control for these new crypto data centers and how to coordinate with those as the first baby step into the DERMS space. That if we're controlling customer loads, like that sounds like kind of maybe an easy win for a DERMS type application. And so we put out an RFP and we said, we actually want 2 bids from every responder. We want to know what would it look like to solve for this use case, and what would it like if we implemented every piece of your solution. So give us the whole vision as well. And we're talking about 2022. So this was a space full of startups that had no definition about what DERMS is, exactly what it ought to do. And OATI was something of a standout at that time because not only could they implement a solution to our immediate need, but they demonstrated that they had a fairly comprehensive solution already built. They already had some clients that were using this in a more comprehensive way. And so it felt like, given the modular nature of their design, we could take one step and then the next and then the next. And so we're never overreaching and stepping into a space that didn't meet an immediate customer need.
Yeah, our CEO, Sasan Mokhtari, has always said that turnkey never worked for energy. And no matter how much the vendor community tries to shove that down the throats of its customers, every utility is different. Their customer base is different. Their, the weather, whatever it is. And having something that meets you where you are in that dynamic is critically important. How do you guys navigate also on the interoperability side? Because I think that's where the turnkey doesn't work. You start to reinforce that message because anything that you add has to play nice with what you've got. Mm-hmm. Most utilities don't have the ability to do a clean sweep or replace everything in favor of going to a single platform. So how do you guys navigate, putting the puzzle together and making sure it all plays well?
There are some ways in which OATI's solution just makes that problem easy. And there are some ways where, like in any software project, we've got to figure some stuff out, right? Yeah. So we have this legacy thermostat system that is signaled through our AMI system. This was Silver Spring's pre-Itron, so we're talking about some legacy technology here. And we have to figure out, how does that work in the modern world of thermostat controls? We're engaging with OATI in that conversation, and it's a mix and match of it. Maybe there's some slight modifications to how we think about the program and its design, and maybe there's some slight modifications we can make within the OATI configuration to make all that work. On the larger loads side, we've helped ourselves a little bit by using industry standard edge devices. And so we rely on Schweitzer's blue boxes as much as any utility, and they have a pretty flexible RTAC system that we can program to talk to most any edge device. And DNP, Modbus, all of that can come back to DERMS, and it has a pretty stable, consistent way that we can configure all of that. So as long as we're using those blue boxes, we are golden.
You mentioned economic development a couple of times. I'm curious because with this kind of technology stuff within utilities, I think most utility leaders are used to being in the shadows a little bit. Like they don't, they don't need the limelight, and what technologies you're using don't reach that end consumer, or they're not aware of them. But in the case of C&I, I'm interested in, do you have these conversations with large load customers and say, here's the suite of tools that we're now able to utilize. Here's how we can engage with you. Here's how we can make this a seamless experience. I'm curious if they're starting to learn what a DERMS is and getting more acquainted with, the control room.
Sure, and they have their own world of vendors trying to sell them control technologies and things as well. So niche applications, kind of industry by industry, but they all know the protocols, right? They know OpenADR, and they've heard of Modbus and these kinds of things. And if not them, then the consultants and contractors that are working for them. So we do have that fairly standard interface that we can always find some language that we can all talk, right? So we talk to them constantly, especially if they're considering locating in our area as we're designing the solution to serve them. We are talking constantly with them about their options, about what we can provide to them, about how that works. It helps to have a standard to start from, and you adhere to that standard as close as you can, because that helps them have a spec to build to. Yeah. But whenever you're talking to hyperscalers or customers that have a pretty unique situation, it's a conversation.
Ryan Jones, thanks so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you.